what are some of the things that you feel like neurodivergent families come to us for and talk to us about, like on a daily basis? Like, what are people who are coming to us on the basis of being a member of a neurodivergent family? What are they coming to us with?
Oh, wow. Well, we have a lot of what I've seen in some of the groups or with working with people one-on-one is many times um, they're the parent of a child or teen, and what they recognize is with their child's experience, they resonate with some of the difficulties that they've had or some of the things they like to do or some of the passions that they have. And so then they start to kind of look at themselves and say, oh, wait, this feels really familiar to me, or it feels really similar. And I think what I've heard, and I think I experienced too with you, was creating just creating a safe space for your kids just based on who they are. Like just not, I didn't think as like, oh, I'm gonna do this thing because my child is autistic. Parents will say, we just created an environment that was nurturing or that was bringing a lot of, focusing on what their passions were or making sure that, everyone felt safe and seen and heard. And then if you do that, then you create like this really nice space where people have a common language and a common experience. So, yeah, I don't know. Does that like answer what you were thinking?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, I think that I think that a question that somebody might have about that though is like, they would say, well, you said, well, I just created a nurturing environment, or I just created an environment where somebody could be themselves. Like when we're talking to people, because you're talking to parents a lot, so like this is really more of a parent-centered thing because like the creation of the environment, but like as far as the parent-centered component of it, like what would you say um, is the advice that we organizationally give to parents who are looking up for information on how to create that environment for their kids?
Yeah, I think the number one thing we say is let this be child led, right? So, like, take cues from your child, get to understand who they are as humans, figure out what their interests are and follow those. We've heard of people who like really their kids really into a particular television show or they're into a particular type of game and they learn how to do that thing so that they can connect with their child in a different way. And then when they're connecting, then you start to learn other things. Like you can have more of those deeper conversations, whether they're 6 or 16. And so just finding those common places and then just allowing them to kind of to run with it a little bit and seeing what the next steps are and saying, okay, well, or I mean, things shift, right? So as kids get older, things will shift. I mean, I will also say that I work with a lot of autistic women, almost all of them late diagnosed. And one of the things oftentimes they'll say is, yes, I recognized my neurodivergence because of my child, but we also see where that parent, maybe they have a newer, younger child, and they're saying, I'm pretty sure my kid is going to be, like neurodivergent like me. So I'm already ready to kind of create that space for them, maybe that I didn't have. Or that I did have, but maybe I'd like to do things a little bit differently. So we do see that on both ends, and I think it's obviously a very individual experience. But I would say that the first thing that we've always said is make it child-led. I think the other piece I would say is you'll hear a term that we might throw around is like throw out the yardstick, right? Like let's not compare our kid to all the other kids, right? Let's just look at our kid for who they are and what they do, what they love, what interests they bring, all that stuff. Like, let's just focus on each individual and not compare them to other people. I mean, I think that's something that parents can take on for themselves too, is like we can tend to compare ourselves to other parents and what they're doing and how they're living their life, but it might not even be the right life for us. So, like, why even look elsewhere and just create like kind of create your own path, really, is how we kind of would coach that. Yeah, I think that's probably the two biggest things I would say.
Something from like the autistic kid perspective, like the child perspective is like, well, I guess it's kind of both, but I think that like you were saying like, let the kid lead essentially, like let the autistic child lead. And that leading is something that can happen in a lot of different ways. Like it doesn't necessarily need to be like, because what I hear a lot is my autistic child won't have a conversation with me, or like or like from the child perspective, like, my parents don't really understand. I don't really want to talk to them about it, or I don't really, I've tried to talk to them about it, but like in the past, they haven't really totally understood my experience. And I think that, a lot of it as a parent is something that can be done kind of observationally. Like there are going to probably be periods in your kid's life where they don't, they're not going to be super transparent with like information with you. And like I think that regardless of what that time in the life is, I think it's like a good thing to do a little bit of observation and like, take a more active role in trying to get an idea of like what those things are. And that's maybe not something that every parent has to do, but I think that if you know that you're a parent of a neurodivergent person, that's probably a good thing to do, I would say. And I guess like a question that I have that comes to mind off of that is like, what recommendations do you have for parents who are in a position where, their neurodivergent kid is, they're having trouble communicating between the two of them, and you know, either a conversation needs to be had, or like what can they do in lieu of not being able to have a conversation?
Yeah. No, I think, and I do get that question a lot, and it's different approaches for different people, of course. I would say the one thing I also suggest is really a lot of transparency. So like let's say, some common things are that come up is, my adult child lives with me. They don't want to talk to me, but they're also not contributing to the house, or they're not doing something that there's some sort of intrinsic expectation that they should be doing in the home. So my first question usually is, well, how have you asked them to contribute to the home? And oftentimes it's, well, I'm not really sure. I'm afraid to ask, or I don't know how they'll take it. I don't want to get them upset. So again, very valid. I get that. But one of the things I suggest is being really transparent with what the need is and the why. I always say, our kids want to know the why behind everything. You ask for something, tell them why you're asking them. So sometimes the conversation is, I try to model it. So I'll say something like, I really love having you spend time with us at dinner because I get to sit with you and find out how your day's going or how your week's going. And I know it's not like the most comfortable thing for you, but can we like figure out a way for you to join us for dinner, maybe like once a week or maybe like twice a week? We don't even have to eat. Maybe dinner isn't the right thing. Maybe we just choose coffee or a snack or something else. So what I do when I offer like those suggestions is I'm giving lots of options. I'm letting the parent feel vulnerable, which is what I suggest is that they have to feel vulnerable so that their child recognizes, or any family member recognizes that they're being authentic and that they really want to be with them. But recognizing that maybe the way I want to sit with you isn't the way you want to sit with me. And maybe it's not the same thing. I mean, for conversations where, you know, the parent feels like they're not having a lot of communication with their child, again, a really frank and open conversation. It's like, I really enjoy talking to you and I miss talking to you. So, can we find a way for us to communicate in a way that makes sense for you, but also helps me feel like I'm connecting with you? Because I love you, you're my child, and I want to feel connected. That statement to me puts the parent-child relationship first. Oftentimes, we have families who get so caught up in the support and the help and the doing that we forget about the actual like parent-child. Let's just enjoy each other and do things that help us be connected more. So I try to bring people back to that. So that's sort of how I would approach those different conversations. And then we can I've teased it out really well with a lot of parents where, I have one parent who comes to me and says, okay, I want to talk to my kid about this thing. This is the script that I have. How does this sound? And then we'll kind of finesse it. And he's like, I think he'll respond this way. How should I respond? And, um, but they really want to just get their message across and not feel like they're imposing on their kid, but also want to get their thoughts across and what they're feeling across. Because it is still a relationship, still two-way, still about communication, just like all relationships, but we might just have to find different ways to do that than than what we think we need or what we're used to seeing anyway.
And I
Yeah.
think something that comes up for me when I'm in groups is because when you're dealing with neurodivergent people, like I think first thing is that like what you're saying is accurate, and also I think that it's kind of hard to do for some people because it requires a sense of being in touch with what your own feelings are. Like you have to know and be aware of and be in touch with the feeling of like I want to have a relationship with my parent or with my kid. And you have to know how you want that to look, and you have to know how you want that to how you want that to feel in a certain sense, and you have to be able to identify that there's a need that you have to have that relationship and to work on that relationship. And I think that for a lot of neurodivergent people that can be kind of a difficult thing to do because it's like there's a lot of energy that you have to devote to finding those answers and how that is for you, and there's not really a lot of shortcuts I think to getting to that answer, like even inside of like what we can offer as services. Like, I don't necessarily think that, we have the perfect way of telling people how they can go about doing that. I think that what we do generally is we support people as they go through that process and we provide feedback um, in the support group space anyway. I think that that's kind of primarily what we're doing. But like, I guess my thing is it's like, how do we better help um, neurodivergent people to find that and to be able to cultivate that conversation in inwardly and also with their family members, because that's probably one of the more challenging things that neurodivergent families, like families with multiple neurodivergent people, that's probably something that is a challenge to deal with because as we've discussed before, maybe one person might have all the bandwidth in the world to do it and then the other person might not, or the entire family is neurodivergent, and for some reason or other, everybody's in their own state of burnout, everybody's in their own state of exhaustion, and nobody's really able to contribute that. Like, what advice should we give to people who are going through that as a group? I mean, I think that I'd like to hear your side from the parent side, but like what I advice that I give is generally pretty situational, honestly, because it really depends on like what's going on and like what the circumstances are. But I try to give advice that centers around um, like knowing yourself and knowing your needs and meeting your basic needs first, um, and getting that energy back, I think is the advice that I tend to give to the neurodivergent adults who are in those relationships with their parents. But what advice do you give or do you see other parents giving to each other in those support group environments?
Yeah, I think where you're right. I think it is situational, but I think almost universally when I'm working with parents, I want my goal is to help them feel like they can take some of the pressure off because I feel like parents are always feeling like they need to be doing the next thing and doing the next thing and doing the next thing. And I think there are periods when that's true. But I think there's also periods where we need to find our own space and our own respite, and exactly what you're saying, Ryan, which is like I need to build up my own stores as a parent so that I have the energy for whatever comes next, right? But also not always worrying about what's the next thing that's going to happen that I have to worry about, right? It's like I also get to live my life in some way and figure out what that is for me. So, finding the way to get breaks, the way to go for a walk. I often tell parents, I had great advice was given to me in a support group that I went to, which was take a little tea light candle and just light it. Go in the bathroom, light it for like 5 minutes. And that's all you do, just the 5 minutes. And all it does is it creates a space, it creates a pause in all the frenzy and all the chaos, and so much so that it stayed with me for many, many years. So I try to encourage parents to find what those little breaks are for them. I also encourage parents to find help, like find support. So if that's finding a therapist, if it's a support group, some other group out there, it doesn't have to be a support group. It can be a knitting group. It can be, book club, something else that you can be with other people, connect with other people, a different part of your identity so that you're nurturing that. And I often find when I give my own self space in those places, I have more bandwidth to come back and I'm more creative. I just have more energy. I can be more compassionate. I can have more empathy for people when I've taken care of myself, even a little bit, like just a tiny bit, because I recognize it can be hard. And I think to your point about like to have some of these conversations, you have to be like introspective and know yourself and know what you want and what you're looking for. I find that my greatest growth personally has been with working with a therapist and being with support group people because they're all the support group folks all kind of are experiencing similar things, maybe at different times, but they also have different approaches. And I think that's really nice to learn different approaches to things I would not have thought of. And then also like the seeing a therapist is really helpful because that helps me to then kind of dig a little bit deeper and understand why I am the way I am and why I, be respond and behave in certain ways. And then I can decide which ones are the ones I need to modify and which ones are the ones that just need to be strengthened. And then I can kind of play with those. And again, that requires vulnerability, it requires wanting to look at yourself and figure out what those things are. But ultimately, I think that's what opens up communication and helps people get better connected. So those are all the pieces that I would suggest when talking to parents and talking to adults too in some cases. Yeah.
Well, that's what I was going to say is I think that with adults, it's very similar in the sense that like all of those things have to be known and there has to be a a moment in time where it feels okay to like invest that energy. And like, when we say like you have to know these things or that you have to you have to want to do it, that's not our way of saying like you should totally be oriented towards doing these things all the time. What it really is saying like that's a necessity, and also it's okay if you're not feeling like doing that at a given time. Like if you spend all of your time working on yourself and trying to improve your mental health and going to therapy and talk like there's no rest built into that. There's no just moment to just be, to just exist and not reflect on yourself because it's very easy to, when you're just getting involved in this stuff, to just drown in all of the different self-help things you can do and all the different support groups you can go to and it's not to say that all those things aren't helpful. I mean, obviously, like we're an organization that is running those things and doing those things all the time, but we're not saying that, you should go to all of them. What we're saying is you should go to the ones that are good for you and that, I mean, you can come to all of them if you want, but like I think that the idea is to maybe find some time to rest. And also I think that some of the most important work in that regard that you can do is to just make space for yourself, whatever that looks like, and to make sure that when you're in that space that it's actually a restful experience and not a experience of work. Because if you're working we do enough work outside of doing all this stuff. Um, so I think recognizing that it is kind of a incremental process and that there are these like little marginal improvements and like really learning to appreciate those little marginal improvements. And then over a long period of time, then you can look back over all those little marginal improvements and then look at what they've resulted in long term. But I think that it really is like a long term thing. And it's okay if it's not together on day one of you interacting with this stuff or even year one of you interacting with this stuff. It's really like a long-term thing. It's very much so like a marathon and not a sprint because there's not really an endpoint. Like it's a race that you're running that has no finish line. So like really just slow down a little bit and relax and just understand that like the only good things can come out of doing this stuff. So do it at your own pace. And just really, do it in a way that feels good to you. Don't force yourself to do something that doesn't feel right to you. We already do plenty of that in our lives. So um, I think that we're probably coming on to some time here, so I just want to close out by mentioning our Parents as Partners presentation, which is something that we're going to be doing, I think, on March 10th, right? And that's going to be more about the relationship between the neurodivergent parent and the neurodivergent child, and that's something that we talk about in our unique relationship as a mother and child who are neurodivergent that work together on this issue. So it's a really good presentation. I feel good to be able to give it. And, if you're interested, definitely go to aane.org/events to go register for that. But at this time, I just want to say to everybody, thank you for watching. And, hopefully see you at the Parents as Partners thing or any of our other events at aane.org/events.